So we're going to have a Q&A session, and you're very welcome to ask as we go along. So if you want to say anything, or come with a kind of counter argument, or you want to ask a follow-up question or whatever, you're very welcome to do so, because it's nice to have a bit of discussion on these retreats. Sometimes if it goes kind of too much one way and not enough discussion, sometimes you don't actually learn properly what these sutras are about, or how to apply these teachings, etc., etc. So I'm going to take a question from the Danish butter cookies jar. It doesn't smell like Danish butter cookies anyway. Okay, so let's just see what happens. So there's quite a few here already, which is always nice. People are taking an interest. That's good. Okay, dear Ajahn, thank you for your wonderful teachings. May I please ask, if I go to the supermarket and buy a piece of meat and take it home and cook it and then eat it, have I made any bad karma? This is a very difficult question to answer. It really depends. It depends on many factors. Remember, when we deal with karma, what we are essentially dealing with is intention. Yeah. So, what is your intention? An intention can be, dark, or it can be bright, depending on what motivates the intention. So, you have the bad intentions, are intentions based on greed or ill will, and to some extent delusion, and the good ones are the opposites. And of course, when you buy meat in the supermarket, there's likely to be some greed because you're going to eat this meat. And so maybe you then minimize the suffering of the animals or whatever because of that. So I would say, yes, maybe there is a little bit of bad karma there. But karma, it doesn't really work quite like that. It's not really either good or bad, and that's the end of the story. Karma comes more like in a grayscale. So you have the really dark stuff. The really dark stuff is if you do something out of hatred or something, kill somebody or steal something, but you're really coming from a very negative and dark place. Then you have the very brightest karma. The very brightest karma is the karma that leads to rebirth in the Brahma Loka, for example. So that would be things like attaining jhana states and these kind of things. And so this is how bright and dark karma is basically defined in the sutras. The karma that leads to the Brahma Loka, and the karma that is kind of takes you to the hell realms or something like that. But everything in between is kind of grayscale. And this sort of karma that you're talking about, buying meat in a supermarket, obviously it is not the super bright karma that leads you to the Brahma Loka, but nor is it the dark karma that leads you to being reborn in a terrible state. It is somewhere in between. It is not super bad. And I think this is why the Buddha doesn't actually prescribe this or have a rule against eating meat in the sutras. I think that is likely to be the reason, because it isn't anything that will block you from even achieving awakening. The Buddha is also known to have eaten meat. It's a bit different, of course, if you are a monk, because then you are offered the meat. As a layperson, you're making more of a deliberate choice. But he didn't tell his lay disciples that they should not eat meat. And so it is kind of grayscale thing there. I would say if you, out of the goodness of your heart, stop eating meat, I would say it's wonderful. Then you're definitely making good karma by stopping doing it, because you're doing it out of an act of compassion, for the animals or whatever. In that case, it is great, and it's going to be a positive contribution to your spiritual practice if you do that. So it is. It's not a very important thing from the sutra's point of view. However, you could argue that in the present day, meat eating is far more problematic than it was 2,500 years ago. And because of that, there's a better reason now for not doing it. And so there may be more wholesome intention in not doing it these days, in which case it's going to contribute more to your spiritual practice if you do that, as well as the welfare of the animals, of course. So there's no kind of yes and no answer to these kind of questions. So something like that, It's more like, it's useful to think about karma more like grayscale than black and white. It's not very rarely black or white. It's usually somewhere on the spectrum. Somewhere on the spectrum. Everything's on the spectrum these days. So, and this is actually a very kind of nice way of thinking about the idea of karma. Thinking about it as a grayscale, Because if you think about it like that, then our job is to kind of move up the grayscale, to make Kamma that is brighter and brighter. Yeah, most of us, we're not capable of making that Kamma which is purely bright. Making pure good Kamma is impossible because we can't achieve the jhanas or whatever. But what we can do is that we can make better, we can have less, we can have lighter shades of grey in the Kamma by adding more metta, more compassion, more renunciation, more generosity into our acts. And that is then how you kind of move up the scale, so to speak. It's one way of thinking about the Buddhist path. Okay. So if you're not happy with what I say, please feel free to ask again or whatever. Dear Ajahn, many thanks for your teachings. Could you elaborate on the role of right view in breaking the cycle of dependent origination in everyday daily practice? Much metta. Yeah, so right view is absolutely fundamental because the cycle of dependent origination starts with avidya, which is basically delusion, sometimes translated as ignorance, but it means the opposite of insight. This morning or this afternoon I said that vidya can probably best be rendered as insight. So avidya is anti-insight. What is anti-insight? Delusion, maybe, or darkness, or something, kind of something, the opposite of insight, foolishness. All of these things are possibilities. And right view and insight are very closely related to each other. So it matters enormously. The more right view you have, basically the more aligned you are with the insights or the seeing things in the right way, the knowledge or the whatever you call avidya or vidya at the beginning of the path. So right view is critical for the kind of the undermining of that, the avidya, which kind of feeds the whole basically of dependent origination. So how do we deal with that in daily life? Well, basically it comes back to very simple things like keeping your precepts, reducing the defilements of the mind, these sort of things, because the defilements of the mind are what feed avidya. So the more of you have of the 5 hindrances, the more avidya you will have. This is actually a sutta that says that specifically, to starve avidya of its power, to starve it of its ability to delude you, reduce the 5 hindrances. And when the mind is pure, then avidya is very weak. And that is why the purpose of meditation is to overcome the 5 hindrances, achieve a state of samadhi where the hindrances are completely gone. I don't like the word suppressed, but they are gone for a while. And then when they are gone, avidya is weak because it's lacking the support of the 5 hindrances. And that's why after the 5 hindrances are gone, we can achieve the real insight or right view or whatever. So daily life, just keep reducing the defilements of the mind. Have more compassion, have more metta, have more equanimity, have more all of the good things. And as you do that, you are actually heading in the right direction as far as this is concerned. Okay, so let's see. Wow, long one. Okay. Bhante, meditators start by working with the 5 hindrances. There are also states, conditions of the mind, Cittasankhara. Right? Is that what we're saying? Right? Was that? Yeah, right. Then we hear about defilements, taints, asavas, and the residues. These are probably the underlying tendencies. Could you please explain these subtler states? How do they relate compared to the hindrances? When we are meditating, how should we work with them? Thank you. When is a hindrance something else? So these are actually interesting questions, and they are important. All of these things are different words for defilements or corruptions or whatever you want to call them of the mind. And one of the interesting things about the 5 hindrances that I think most people don't really understand is that they are usually used in the suttas to describe the defilements that are there just before you attain samadhi. So they are, in other words, they refer to very refined defilements of the mind, the 5 hindrances. When most people talk about the 5 hindrances, often they mean quite coarse states. You feel a bit of ill will, or whatever, or you have some, strong kind of desires, or whatever it might be. Usually, people talk about fairly coarse hindrances. But that actually is eliminated earlier on the path. That is eliminated usually through sense restraint, through the sati sampajanya, the mindfulness and clear awareness. Or even by keeping your precepts. Keeping your precepts actually reduces the defilements of the mind, because you don't have this outlet to express yourself in the ways that you want to, and the mind kind of withdraws a little bit from those areas. So there's a large kind of reduction of defilements before we even come to the 5 hindrances. The 5 hindrances are like, the last thing you eliminate before you come to the jhanas, basically. So the proper understanding of the hindrances is the word for the hindrances. One word for the hindrances in the suttas is upakilesa. That's one word that is used for that. And upakilesa is like a fairly refined hindrance usually here. That's how they come out in the suttas. So that is the 5 hindrances. And this is actually quite important to understand, because what that means is that you understand what you should be dealing with. What are the priorities? And on the path, the priorities, well, when it comes to sense restraint, what we want to avoid there is we want to avoid strong desires, and we also want to avoid ill will or negativity. These are the 2 priorities on the path. The tiredness or the restlessness of the mind or the doubt, these are not the priorities. They are very refined states that only come as you are getting close to samadhi. So our priorities in daily life should be desires and ill will. Two main priorities. Of those 2, number 1 is ill will. Ill will is by far the most destructive kind of mental state. So overcome that first of all. And it is not that hard to overcome, or at least reduce. It is not that difficult. A little bit of kind of yoniso manasikara, a little bit of reflecting in the right way, and you will be surprised. How kind of you can almost eliminate ill will from your life. It's not completely, perhaps, because sometimes things get really difficult and hard and whatever, and many things happen at once, many triggering things, many triggers, one after the other, and before you know it, you are triggered by all those triggers, and then you have a problem. But we can go a long way in overcoming ill will, most people, just by reflecting in the right way through this idea of sense restraint. You can see why it matters to understand the sequence here, because you don't waste your time by overcoming tiredness and restlessness at the early stages of the path. Then, when you come to meditation on the breath, most of the ill will, most of the desire is already gone. The mind is reasonably peaceful. You have a sense of a kind of upekkha, the upekkha that comes from sense restraint. Different levels of upekkha. Upekkha means equanimity, in case you don't know. Different levels of upekkha. This is the initial upekkha in the suttas, the one that comes from sense restraint. So you go to meditation, then your mind is already reasonably balanced. And then you reduce the hindrances further. And at some point, there will be hindrances like tiredness or restlessness that almost seem to have a life of their own, not really related to ill will and desire. So one of the reasons why ill will and desire are so important is because they are the hindrances that support the other ones. Most of the restlessness, most of the tiredness, even the doubt arise because of the first 2 hindrances. They are like the supports for the other ones. So by reducing the first 2, shouldn't call them hindrances, call them defilements or whatever. By reducing the first 2, all 5 are actually reduced as a consequence. So know where to focus, know what matters. There are so many suttas that talk about the gradual reduction of the defilements. One of my favorite ones is the Pangsudovaka Sutta, which means the earth cleaner, the earth remover. This is where we remove impurities from gold. And just as gold, when you want to refine gold, you have to remove the impurities in stages. First of all, the most coarse ones. Take out the kind of the gravel first of all, because gravel is easy to remove. Then you remove like the finer particles like sand. Then you remove maybe the dust. It's a gradual process. At least this is the way it was done at the time of the Buddha. I don't know how they refine gold these days, but that was the way it was done. And finally, you put the gold into the furnace, and through burning it in the furnace, you eliminate the final defilements of the gold. And the mind is just like that. You start off with the coarser defilements of the mind, the greed and especially the greed and ill will that leads to the breaking of the precepts. This is like number one. And then you move on to kind of just generally bad qualities of speech and body, and then you kind of move on to the more refined defilements. And some of the most refined defilements talked about in this sutta are the defilements that have to do with your identity, with who you are, who is your family, what is your country. In other words, this has to do with a sense of self, with delusion in a way. And so these are very refined defilements. But they too can lead to restlessness because you think about, you are attached to these things, you long for them, the mind needs to talk to itself because maybe you feel that your identity is going, who am I? My thoughts are disappearing. What is going on now? Oh, actually, quite nice when the thoughts are disappearing. Yeah, okay, let them go. And after a while, you start to identify with something else. You identify with that still mind instead of identifying with your thoughts. You just need to make that transition in a certain way. And so this, to me, is the right way of thinking about all of these various defilements. But let me add that they do have slightly different connotations as well. They are used for different areas, basically. So, for example, when you say the word defilement here, the word usually is kilesa in Pali. But in the suttas, you don't find the word kilesa so much. You find the word upakilesa. Is much more important in the suttas. And so that is what matters there. Kilesa usually means more like the three root defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion, or lobha, dosa, moha, desire, ill will, and confusion maybe, the different translations of that. So that's kilesa and upakilesa. Kilesa referring to the three roots, the root defilements, upakilesa referring more to the hindrances, the things that happen when the mind gets quite refined, the final defilements you have to overcome to reach samadhi. That's two of those things. Then you have asked about the taints. Well, the taints is a translation for the āsavas, and it has been argued that the word taints is not a good translation for āsavas. It should be, because the word taint in English means like something very refined usually. You taint, maybe the taint is like a discoloring or something like that. It's not something very strong. And so āsavas, and maybe better to translate as corruptions or something like that. And these are more like the most deep-seated in a sense. These show you the core, the kind of the areas where we need to let go, the core areas that are problematic. And that's why the asavas are the kama asava, the corruption relating to sensuality or sensual desire. This is a very, very big one. It's enormous. We are really immersed in sensuality. Our whole world really is the five senses. This is a really, really big one. And we're attached to this in so many different ways. So that's why that is the main work of a meditator, is to overcome that kama asava, so you can step out of the world of the five senses. And this is the extraordinary thing with a deep state of samadhi, is that you actually leave that world of the five senses. So it's like entering a different reality here. And that's exciting, super duper interesting. And you start to understand why the Dhamma is so powerful. When you leave that world, you think, lo and behold, how delightful it is to leave that world and behind it. This was so problematic, that world of the five senses. And so this is, for that reason, a core asava, because so much of our existence, it relates to the world of the five senses. And then you have the bhava asava, which is the corruption of existence, or the corruption for desire to exist. This is obviously another big one, right? This is kind of, again, very core to what it means to have a sense of self. If you have a sense of self, almost by definition, you want to exist. You want to carry on. You want to keep on going. That's what kind of the existence does. And so this is a very, very difficult one to overcome. So this, again, you have to do things sequentially. First of all, you overcome the world of sensuality. When that is overcome, only then should you move on to overcoming the bhava-asava, which is the corruption of relating to the desire to exist, because it is very profound and it needs insight and right view and these kind of things. And then finally, you have the avijja-asava. Avijja-asava is the corruption relating to ignorance or delusion. And so this is like an overall asava. I once had a discussion with Ajahn Brahmali. I asked him, what is actually avijja asava? When you have accounted for kama asava and bhava asava, is there really anything left? And he said, don't think so. I guess pretty much it. Well, he was pretty clear it was. And I couldn't really think of it myself either. The only thing I can think of there is that might be... it might relate to is the desire to be annihilated. That is a kind of avijja, because you have the three cravings: the cravings for in the sensory realm, the cravings to exist, and then the craving to be annihilated. So avijja might relate to that in that particular context. So the asavas are like kind of the really root problems that we need to overcome in our existence. So there are one particular view of those root defilements. And that's why it is said when you become an arahant, you are keen asava. You have ended the asavas, because you have ended those things that are at the core or are at the bottom of the foundation for all the other problems of existence. So that is the asavas. And then the last one you have here, you mentioned the residues, and I think maybe usually that is called the underlying tendencies. I think that's probably what you are referring to, although I cannot be certain certain, of course. And so these underlying tendencies, they are things that are within us that don't always manifest, but they are still there, so they will come out again in the future. So for example, if you have a very good meditation and you may not have any ill will for a long time, it doesn't mean you have overcome ill will once and for all. It may still be at the root level deep within you, waiting for the right conditions to come out again. And so there are 7 such underlying tendencies as they're listed in the suttas. Ill will, desire, doubt, 7. I can't remember the exact 7. It's not a very common list, that's why I can't remember them. I think they are found in the Chulamalunkyā Sutta. I think Majjhima Nikāya 63. I think you find the 7. So there is actually I should have mentioned that. Thank you. The dit asava occurs, I think, only in the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. It does not occur elsewhere. So the standard 3 is the other 3, and dit asava is occasionally added. So I think the root list is the other 3, and dit asava has somehow been added to that. In which one? Sabbasava Sutta. No, the Sabbasava Sutta. That's an interesting sutta because it talks about the asavas in a very different way, actually. It doesn't really talk about the asavas in terms of those 3 or those 4. It more talks about asavas in a kind of broad sense, as meaning general defilement. So you overcome certain asavas by using, for example, using your requisites rightly, you overcome asavas. And those asavas will be attachment maybe to those requisites or something like that. And then other asavas are overcome by sense restraint. So these again there's a different usage in that particular sutta of the word asava, which is kind of interesting. So as always, there's a bit of flexibility with this terminology. It's not always consistently used in the same way. Yes, ping pong.
In this case, in terms of translation, might not be related to the retreat. Ajahn translated the word asava in this particular sutta as defilement. So in this case, he's not wrong because it's generic or general.
So he uses different translation in that sutta compared to other suttas. Is that what you say?
I'm not quite sure because I haven't checked everything. But in this particular suttas, he used the word defilement, and it seems to make sense, especially after you explain this.
I suspect that he probably uses the same word throughout. He probably uses defilement throughout for asava, I would think. But there is certainly a case to be made that sometimes you can translate the same word in different ways because contexts are quite separate. And you will often not find one English word that covers all those contexts. And so you have to use different words to translate the same word sometimes. So absolutely, yeah. I'm actually in favor of that myself, because I know that sometimes people are trying so hard to find one English word that kind of relates to all the power, and it's impossible. It just cannot be done, and you end up with some crazy constructions that no one can understand. Yeah, everything becomes very rigid, and you cannot understand anymore what the translation says, and that kind of defeats the purpose. The whole point is to kind of understand what's going on. If you can't understand it, it's silly. And the classic one is volitional formations. That's the classic one that was used for sankharas, and no one understands what volitional formation means. What does it mean, volitional formation? I mean, if you think about it, you can kind of figure it out, but you forget every time you read, because it's not intuitive, right? It's not really completely unintuitive. And so this is one of the things when I wrote to Bhikkhu Bodhi, I said, no one understands it. I've been a monk for 20 years. I still don't understand this translation, I told him. And he said, okay. So he changed it. Yeah, I mean, that was kind of nice. And so now he uses volitional activities instead. Which, was that? It's in the right direction. Activities is much easier to understand than formations. Volitional is still a bit of a heavy word. So willed activities will be better, yeah? Then you're getting really close maybe to the something that is understandable. So, yeah. So that is the last one there was the residues. Yeah. Yeah, anusayas. Yeah, these are the anusayas. So these would be the latent tendencies, often called as well. Yeah, that's how I understand the residues here, but yeah. So underlying things, sitting there, waiting to be annihilated, but not yet annihilated. You think you are pure as snow. It turns out you're not. There are some defilements in that snow. This is what happens, right? You can finally, wow, meditation is so good. I feel really, really good now. You feel you've made it, and then bang, the defilements come back again. And this is kind of the problem. And this is really problematic if you if you are someone who practices a different kind of meditation system, where the purpose is to achieve samadhi, and because it's very deluding. These states are incredibly powerful, and if you achieve them, you think you are on top of the world, you think you are God, you think you are whatever, but it turns out you're not God after all, and you get very disappointed when you're not God. Maybe. So something like that. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, I don't usually read the names. You have signed it with your name, which is very nice. I like if people do that, but I don't usually read the names out. So you can decide yourself whether you want to follow up or not. All right. Very good. Okay. So, wow, 2 questions on one page and small handwriting. Okay, let's see. Question number 1. Dear Ajahn, I have a question about the Kalyana Mitta. In some expositions, the Buddha places the Kalyana Mitta at the start of the causal sequence that leads to awakening. To me, this implies that the true spiritual friend is more than just a good person. Exactly. This is very perspicacious of you. And even someone with noble intentions and aspirations. Indeed, they are someone who will lead us to awakening. So in this context are those teachers, both lay and monastic, who talk about awareness is unconditioned, or about sutta jhanas versus visuddhimagga jhanas, real kalyana mittas. How can they lead us to nibbana if they don't know what nibbana is themselves? Yes, this is a very good point. Yeah? So, and this is why it is so important to come to the suttas. There are so many teachers in the world, and they often contradict each other, and it makes it really, really hard to know what is the real Dhamma. And the only arbiter we have to decide what is the real Dhamma are the suttas. There is nothing else. in the end, you have to go back there. And even when you go to the suttas, it can be difficult because we read the suttas in different ways. We read things into the suttas. The sense of self is so strong that the sense of self will read the suttas in a biased manner so as to see things there that are not actually there. This is what makes it so hard. And so it is complicated and a difficult question. And so the real Kalyanamitta in the world, number one Kalyanamitta, is the Buddha. That's why the Buddha is number one Kalyanamitta, and that is why it is so useful to befriend the Buddha, to get a feeling for who he was, to understand him as a human being, to maybe go to India and see some of the places where he was, to see how he deals with things in the suttas, to get a feeling for the Buddha as a person. All of these things build up a sense of, okay, this is someone I can listen to. This is my teacher. He teaches me when he teaches the suttas. I'll get back to all of these things when we come to the Mahanama Sutta later on. And so the Buddha is number one, Kalyanamitta. That's really how you should think about the Buddha. He is your spiritual friend. And then you can see why he is at the beginning of the spiritual path, because essentially that is the same thing as the Noble Eightfold Path, where right view is at the beginning. The Buddha gives us that right view. He says, this is the way the world works. If you're wise, listen to me, and then practice accordingly, you will have certain results. If you are not wise, you're not going to bother listening to the Buddha, and then of course it's going to be problematic. And so the Buddha is number one, Kalyanamitta. He gives us that right view. This is the most precious gift anyone can give to another person, is right view. Because then you can start making good decisions based on right view. Wrong view means you're going to make all kind of crazy decisions. It's going to be to your own detriment and also to the detriment of others. And so this is the Buddha. Then, of course, there are other Kalyanamittas, and these are the teachers in the world, people we rely on to understand the suttas. I have to admit that when I started out, I was kind of lucky. I ended up with Ajahn Brahm. It's weird. I don't know how I ended up with Ajahn Brahm as my teacher. Well, I know how, because I can tell you the story, but it's still weird because I was in England at the time in some of the monasteries over there, and then someone kind of passed me an Ajahn Brahm talk kind of under the table. Shh, don't give it back to me straight away. Don't kind of give it to anyone else. Here under the table, this was underground Dhamma. Every monastery has some underground Dhamma. That's kind of how monasteries are. So you get this, and of course, when it's underground, it's even more interesting, right? Wow, this is interesting stuff. Okay, wow, I got to listen to this. And it was interesting because I knew straight away that this is my teacher. There was something about Ajahn Brahm I'd never heard before. There was something about the confidence but not the confidence that was egocentric or full of itself, but a confidence that just knew what was going on. There was no one like Ajahn Brahm where I was at the time. And so it was, wow, this is really powerful stuff. Listen to some of Ajahn Brahm's talk from the early 2000s or that time period when he taught Dhamma in a different way from what he does now, especially to the monastics. It's really, really powerful talks. And so I went with Ajahn Brahm, and I consider him, obviously, I learned from him basically how to read the suttas. In those days, he would teach the suttas to the monks in the monastery. And I learned how to put it together, how to read one sutta in light of other suttas, and kind of start to understand how it all works. And so that is what I did. And what was really beautiful about Ajahn Brahm was that I could always question him, and he would never get upset, regardless of how much I questioned him. He might yawn and look up in the ceiling and say, "Oh no, not again!" But he would never get upset. And that is so beautiful. And he would say things like, "The Buddha is your primary teacher. Buddha's number one." So this is my talk, but the Buddha is number one. In other words, what that means is that you can challenge everything Ajahn Brahm says based on what is in the suttas. And so that is, to me, one of the signs of an Aryan, someone who is a noble person, is that they put the Buddha first. That is a sign. Anyone who kind of puts themselves first is always already a bit dodgy. Because, almost by definition, it is self-centered if you do that. So this is how you gradually find your way through this jungle of samsara, trying to find the best teachers. It's really difficult. And I must admit, feel sorry sometimes for lay people. It's much more difficult as a lay person than it is as a monastic. At least we have access to teachers. We know a little bit more about what's going on. But for lay people who are even more removed, actually it's very hard. And so just keep your eyes open. Don't be afraid of questioning. Don't be afraid of judging. You have to judge to some extent. Don't judge absolutely, but judge, okay, this looks less likely, this more likely, in that way. And then you're going to be on the right track. So let me see if I answered anything of what you said. Awareness is unconditioned, or about sutta jhana versus visuddhimagga jhana. I disagree with both of those ideas, and so I would say maybe there can be, I don't know, maybe there can be partial kalyanamitas. Maybe they have some nice, useful things. Sometimes you take the good things and you leave out the bad things. There are different possibilities, but So anyway, that gives you some ideas of how to kind of find your way to the best teachers, maybe. Question number 2. Following on from the last question, I've heard that the Buddha said that the true Dhamma will disappear, not from outside threats, but from the arising of the counterfeit Dhamma. Is that what jhana light and all this other stuff is? How do we relate to these teachers and teachings when, on the one hand, our friends and community embrace them and hold them in high regard, but on the other hand, they spread watered-down teachings? It really pains me to hear these monks tell people that they're doing jhana when they are not. So it is problematic because, and the reason it is problematic is because the jhanas are part of the Noble Eightfold Path, and if you get the jhanas wrong, you're not fulfilling the Noble Eightfold Path. It's that simple, And so it matters that we get them wrong, get them right. Please get them right. So what does that mean? And what it means in practice is that you should move towards these states as much as you possibly can. And you know that what we are looking for are states of mind that are very peaceful and very blissful. So the more peaceful the state of mind you have, the more blissful it is, the more likely it is to be a jhana. So continue on that path further and further and further until it kind of stops by itself. And then you are most likely to achieve the real samadhi that the Buddha is talking about. If you have jhana light, then probably you also have nibbana light. Because that means that nibbana also kind of gets pulled down a little bit. And so these things affect each other in that way. So, yes. So that's exactly right. The counterfeit Dhamma arises in the world. And that's when it kind of, just like counterfeit gold, it says in that sutta with Mahakassapa, then the real gold loses its value. The real Dhamma loses its value. How to help other people is really hard. You just have to live well and do the right thing, and and kind of point things out in a kind way and see what happens. All right. These are really good questions and very, very long questions, really very involved. Okay, so here we have, so this is a dependent origination question here. What is the relationship between consciousness and name and form? Are they interdependent? So this is a bit more philosophical. This is directly related to the third and the fourth factor of dependent origination. And according to that, consciousness is the condition for name and form. Vijnana paccaya namarupa, and name and form is the condition for vijnana. So namarupa paccaya vijnana. So it's a mutual conditioning here. And you find this in a number of suttas. They usually when dependent origination is given, it is given as 12 steps, but sometimes it's given as 9 or 10. It stops with consciousness. It doesn't include the first 2 steps of dependent origination. And then often it says namarupa and vijnana condition each other. And what that means is that no matter how far back you go, if you go back into the past, even if you go into a past life, all you will see is namarupa and vijnana conditioning each other. Yeah. So instead of going back from vijnana to sankhara and avidya, I hope you're with me now. I'm using many Pali terms here, probably losing some of you, but the first two terms, instead of using those, you actually just keep on going with namarupa and vijnana, back and back and back, conditioning each other as far back as you want. These are the only things you ever see, namarupa and vijnana. So yes, so they are interdependent. The sutras use the simile of the two sheaves of reed. When two sheaves of reed are leaning on each other, take one away, the other one falls. Take one away, the other one falls. They depend on each other to remain. Yeah. So if you can end the vijnana or you end namarupa, you end the other one, and so the things start to cease because of that. So what exactly is the relationship? It's a very interesting relationship because this relationship is at the core of dependent origination. This is really what overturns the existing philosophies at the time of the Buddha. The most important philosophy at that time was the Brahmanical philosophy, the idea that there is some permanent essence in the world called Brahma or called Atta, Atman and Brahman. Ultimately, Atman and Brahman were said to be the same. Yeah, so yourself is the same as the world soul or the world consciousness, which is Brahman. And when you look out into the universe, what you're seeing is just really a reflection of that Brahman, which is the universal soul. It is just a kind of a picture, if you like, of that. So they are saying that is what kind of lies behind there. Behind it, there's this permanent entity called this world soul, right? And we are sort of part of that world soul, except that we are deluded, we don't understand it, and we need to practice samadhi to be able to access that world soul within ourselves. And then the Buddha comes and says, no, that's completely wrong. It isn't like that. The Buddha says that vijnana, consciousness, depends on namarupa. It does not stand on its own. There is no Brahma which stands on its own, which is the ground of all being, which is the consciousness in the world. He says that's just what is the right word? It's just a figment of the imagination or a misunderstanding, or it is going beyond the evidence. Yes, the evidence for Brahman, the reason why they make this claim is because they have a state of samadhi. And when they have a state of samadhi, which of course is going to be very interesting, like, wow, this is it. I found the nature of reality. That's what it feels like, the meaning of everything, the deepest bliss, the unity, the self is basically gone. This must be the ground of all existence. Surely, okay, it is the ground of all existence. But actually, you haven't proven that at all. All you have proven is that there is such a thing as a state of samadhi that arises and passes away. If you say it's permanent, you're going way beyond the evidence. And so any religion or spiritual system or philosophy or psychology or whatever that postulates a permanent entity is by definition going beyond the evidence. No permanent entity can ever be experienced. All experience arises and passes away. That is, I think, a very misunderstood, not properly understood about human experience. And this is, it's like a very simple thing to understand once you kind of get your head around it. But it's, the sense of self distorts everything. And that's why we have all of these religions and all of these psychologies based on some kind of permanent entity within, even though obviously, actually, it's impossible to prove such a thing. It is always going to be like an imaginary thing, sometimes something we have made up as human beings. And so the Buddha comes then and says that actually consciousness depends on name and form. And name and form can be understood in two different ways. It can be understood as the other mental and physical aggregates, the rest of who you are as a person. Okay, consciousness is the knowing, and the rest of the mind and the body, that is name and form. And the two depend on each other. So consciousness can never stand alone, in other words. It depends on these other factors. But there's another way of thinking about this, which is also very interesting. And that is to understand, well, why did the Buddha use this term, name and form, namarupa? It's a strange word, right? Where does he get this from? He only uses it in the context of dependent origination. So why does he use it? And I think the answer is in the existing culture of the time, which is the Brahmanical culture. In that culture, namarupa meant identity. Yeah, a person there's two ways you recognize a person. First of all, form, or you can say appearance. Appearance and form is something. You look at someone and say, oh, yeah, I recognize that person from appearance. One. The other way you recognize a person is from their name. Yeah. And of course, that name is also related to your psychology somehow. So you have name and form. Yeah, this is how we individuate. And so namarupa, one way of translating that is as individuation. You individuate the world. And so what consciousness depending on namarupa means is that consciousness depends on individuation. Consciousness exists in relation to individuals. It always exists in relation to individuals. It can never be a world soul. It can never be something which encompasses everything else. It always relates to individuals. Yeah? So this is one understanding of it, coming from that Brahmanical background to these things. So these are kind of, two different ways, if you like, to think about this. But the main point here is that everything depends on other things. Nothing stands on its own. That is what this means. Anyway, that's getting quite involved there with philosophical things and things. Yes, Gillian?
Could you maybe repeat already about namarupa? Because at some point I've heard it, I've been told that it could be maybe translated as materiality. And when I think about materiality, I think about substance.
Yeah.
Chairs, nylon, the earth, the other elements.
Yeah.
Not about people.
Right.
So you're saying it's really the way I think about myself, maybe imagination.
Yeah, so the five khandhas are really, you should look at it from your own experiential point of view. Everything should be looked at from your own experiential point of view, not as some kind of abstract material in the world, because it's really just abstractions otherwise. So from our experience, what are material phenomena, what is rupa? And from our from our personal experience, it's like this, solely, this is rupa, yeah, this is rupa over here. This is how you know something is rupa. So it is an experience, ultimately, an experience of solidity, an experience of something. And so that is, you can see why it is often called the body, because that's kind of the main rupa that relates to a human being. So if I talk about my five khandhas, then very often it would be this body here, yeah, or my body, if you like. Yeah. And so this is kind of the main idea of rupa, but it is an experience. Yeah, you experience this body here, yeah, through your senses or whatever. Yeah. And that is really what matters. Everything should really be brought back to experience, because it is an experience that dukkha exists. It's an experience that everything really exists ultimately here. And this is kind of what I think one of the problems of the modern worldview, where you talk about, the world out there having some kind of separate identity or entity, the cosmos or whatever. I mean, ultimately, even the cosmos is in our experience. We see the cosmos, we look at it through the telescope or whatever. It is an experiential thing. Does it make sense to talk about the cosmos as independent of experience? Maybe, maybe not, but it's kind of irrelevant from Buddhist point of view, because everything comes from experience. It relates back to that. Am I saying anything useful? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes? Yeah. Venerable, please.
Yeah. Call it manifestation of energy. What we experience as a real world is a manifestation of energy, because underneath of it all is an energy pattern, which of course again is then coming back to cause and effect.
Yeah, is it manifestation of energy? I don't know. Energy. Yeah, I guess it depends what you mean by energy, right? Energy is so many different things. And I guess if you define energy in a certain way, it could be regarded as that. Energy, if energy is something that moves, maybe. If it is something that moves, then maybe it could be considered energy. It all depends on how we think about these things and what they mean. And so it's hard to really say yes or no, I think. So, yeah. Yeah.
Is also like Sankharupa, Hindrances,
yeah.
Puthujjana, coming from the āsavas.
Yeah.
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 That would be different to namarupa definition of rupa, or is it the same?
It's included within it. The way that rupa is normally defined in the suttas as the four main elements and elements derived from, or anything derived from the four main elements. And so according to, I think, the Abhidhamma system or whatever, then the five senses are derived from the four main elements. That's why we can see, that's why we can hear, because of the senses are somehow derived from that. So I would say it is included in that somehow. But it's not actually really said directly in the suttas. So, yeah. Maybe the one at the back there, please. Yeah. Yeah.
But nama means, from what I understand, nama means chetna, manisakara, vedna, sanya, and jnana.
Yeah.
So why do we say that this condition, nama vajja, namarupa vajja vijnana? And secondly, this vijnana is actually conditioned. So when we talk about unaware, the unaware consciousness, that is when the five salayatana disappears, the sense there disappears, then that unconditioned consciousness, where does that figure in the
Okay, so yes, nama is defined as those 6 things. Is it 5 or 6? Whatever. 5. Is it 5? Okay. Yeah, passa, chetana, 6. Yeah, sanya, vedana, sankhara, etc. Manasikara. Yeah, no sankhara. That's right. Yeah, manasikara. Yeah. Okay. So yes, it is defined like that, and that means that is one way of thinking about the namarupa, or nama in that way. So you can think of it basically as the other aspects of the mind apart from consciousness, and so it means. But in a sense, that is very similar to name. Name is your identity, and your mental build-up is what kind of makes you who you are. So it's kind of name, and though that mental build-up is almost like it's interchangeable from a certain perspective. But so you can say that yes, consciousness depends on all of these other aspects of your person. That was the 2 ways I was talking about it. You can think of it as all the other aspects of your personality propping up consciousness, consciousness being dependent on those things, or you can think of it more as individuation through namarupa. But it really amounts to the same thing at the end of the day, I think. Then there's the idea of when you take away the 5 senses or 6 senses, Lina. What then is the unconditioned consciousness? Yeah. Okay. So which sutta are you referring to when you talk about this unconditioned consciousness? Don't know. Yeah. Okay. So are you sure it is in the suttas? I'm not sure myself. I don't think it is in the suttas actually. I think there are only 6 classes of consciousness in the suttas. Yeah, it specifically said there are 6 classes, and that there is no consciousness apart from those 6 classes. And those 6 classes refer to the 5 ordinary senses and the mind. So when they are gone, there is no consciousness. So but yeah, so that is one of the vijnanas that you find, I think, in some of the suttas in the Samyutta Nikaya. Apatitta vijnana or something like that, unestablished consciousness. But I don't think it means unconditioned consciousness. It means unestablished consciousness. It means it just means that the consciousness has been freed or liberated or something like that. Yeah, it is no longer established in samsara. It is no longer attached to anything. That is at least one way of understanding it. But to understand it as some kind of unconditioned consciousness, that actually is not, that does not fit with how the suttas work. It is always all consciousness relates somehow to the 6 senses, except that at a certain point, they are no longer grasping those six senses, and so they are freed, and in that sense they are not apatita or apatita. I can't remember this. Apatita, something like that, means not established, not holding on to, not grasping, or to something to that effect. Yeah, well, this is problem. Non-manifested, again, this is kind of these are translations, right? So we have to be careful. And that's what they call the anidasana vijnana, is sometimes translated as non-manifest consciousness. And all consciousness, if it doesn't manifest, it doesn't exist. Yeah, so that's a bad translation. I think it's apatitita, yeah, standing, solid. Yeah, so patitita means something which is established on something, holding on, grasping onto something. And the a prefix means it's not holding on. Yeah. And so, but remember, all of these ideas, the apatitita vijnana and the anidasana vijnana, are very marginal ideas in the suttas. They occur in a very few places. The anidasana vijnana famously occurs in 2 verses, in the Kevada Sutta and in the Brahmanimantika Sutta, I think, Majjhima Nikaya 49 and Digha Nikaya 11. And that 2 verses, and verses are already notoriously difficult to translate. Whenever anything occurs in verse, already you have to be incredibly careful. And I think that my colleague Venerable Sunyo at Vajrayana Monastery made the point that this refers most likely just to infinite consciousness, the 7th of the jhanas, if you like, yeah, the 3rd of the material attainments. And so that is that one. Then you have the apatitita vijnana, which again occurs in a very few places, 2 or 3 times in the suttas. And so it's very important that we don't make too much out of these things, and that we read them in line with the majority of the suttas. Like dependent origination is, for example, a majority sutta because it occurs so many times. And according to that, you have from the cessation of avidya, you get the cessation of sankhara. From the cessation of sankhara, you get the cessation of consciousness. Yeah, and what is consciousness? It is the 6 classes of consciousness, and those 6 classes are everything. Yeah, according to other suttas, there is no 7th class of consciousness, and so that means that when this process of cessation works, nirodha, all consciousness ceases. That is the majority view there. Mm. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So
yes.
This is my first sutta retreat.
Is it?
So what was said in the past 10 minutes really above my head. So I'm still there 10 minutes ago. When you explain, you were talking about rupa, and you said according to the sutta, rupa is derived from 4 elements. I'm still there. I still don't understand.
The 4 elements and any form derived from the 4 elements.
Yes,
that's
what
rupa.
Are the 4 elements?
4 elements is like solidity, material things, water, air, and fire. 4 elements. So this is like all the material phenomena in the world, if you like, can be divided in this way, and then anything derived from that comes out of that. And the 6 senses, or the five senses, are usually said to be derived from the material phenomena in the world. So that's part of the derived phenomena. That's why the 5 senses were mentioned there by Rumi. Yeah. So that's kind of the idea. Yeah. So so don't worry too much about all of those other things, because they're kind of, we are already getting into the weeds of the Dhamma here, the kind of really profound things. And Please, Lal, yeah.
I hope the namarupa argument finished.
Yeah.
But I got something from the sutra. In that one, you said when you do the anapanasati, fulfill knowledge and freedom.
Yeah.
That's actually in the Pali version, it says avidya vimutti.
Vidya vimutti, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have seen it in some other places, the vimutti rising out of vidya.
Yeah.
Vimutti rising out of because of you get vidya.
Yeah.
So in India you say
Yeah.
knowledge and freedom.
Yeah. So yeah. So you're saying sometimes they are a causal sequence, and sometimes they come together. Yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Yeah, so exactly. So there are different kinds of vimutti. And Chaita vimutti means the liberation of the mind. And that can be the jhanas, it can be lower states. And from those, then the higher liberation can happen. So in that case, it is sequential because you have the jhana leading to the insight. But if you talk about panya vimutti, the liberation through wisdom, then that is equivalent to arahantship. And so that is why here vimutti, vidya and vimutti presumably mean that. They mean the panya vimutti. So that's why they arise together. So yeah. So that's a good point. So these things are used differently sometimes. So you have to be a bit careful there. Yeah. Please, yes.
Is there a connection between the vijnana and the karma we have done in the past? I've been thinking that we see something deeper, and one person will think about that completely different from the other person.
Yeah.
So how does this come? Is it coming from the karma that we have done in the past?
Right. So this is interesting because kamma, the idea of kamma is basically about the connection between our intention and the results that we experience. Yeah. So if your intention is bad, you will experience pain in the future. If your intention is good, you will tend to experience happiness in the future. So that is really what kamma is about. So it is quite a limited area. Very often in the modern Buddhist world, we talk about kamma much more broadly, as if it also includes all our habits, for example. This is my kamma, it's because I've done this in the past. It's like a habit. I'm a fireman in this life because I was a fireman in the past life. Yeah, you have the habit of becoming a fireman. Or you have a monk in this life because maybe you were a monk in the past life and you didn't spend your time wisely enough. You translated too much Vinaya or something here. And so so we need to distinguish a little bit between different things here. And so one reason why we see things differently is because of our habits are different. You have a different personality. A personality is really just habits. Personality is ways of doing things, or ways of thinking about the world. That is what a personality is. Yeah. Why are you the person you are? Because of you've been formed in a certain way and built up certain habits and certain ways of doing things. So that is a very important part. And then there's the kamma. The kamma is more the extent to what you experience happiness and suffering in this life because of conditions in the past. So you may have a mind that is kind of geared towards depression. That may be because of bad karma. Maybe you did something bad in the past, and so now you feel maybe deep down, without seeing it, guilty or bad about that, and so you feel a bit depressed, for example. That could be karma. Yeah, that's possible. Certainly karma is about where we are reborn. You're reborn in a certain place. That is certainly about karma, and that is a very close connection between vijnana and karma right there, because the consciousness establishes itself in a certain realm depending on the karma. Consciousness is the seed. Karma is the field. Yeah, so the field where the seed of consciousness lands depends on that field is the karma. So if that's a good field, then the consciousness is going to be happy. If that's a bad field because of bad karma, the consciousness is going to be bad. And the craving is the sap or the moisture which drives the process on again after that. Is that what you were asking? Yeah, good enough? Yeah, okay. Good. Shall we go a bit longer? Yeah, okay. We can make it 1.5 hours, the Q&A session. Yeah, and please, if anyone has heard enough Q&A and you want to leave and you don't have no idea what's going on or whatever, please feel free to leave at any time. Yeah, there's no red marks or black marks or anything for leaving early. In fact, I would encourage it if you just want to chillax and meditate or whatever. But I'll carry on a bit longer because the questions are usually quite many, and we can play it a bit by ear and see what happens on other days if we need to go further or not. So before I go on to this one, is everyone happy so far? Yeah? not quite happy. Happy enough, that's what matters, yeah. Okay. So so what is the definition of a successful life? How do I know if I'm on the right path in life? It's a good question. What is the definition of a successful life? How do you know if you're on the right path? The answer is, I always like to torture the lay people a little bit. Not you, of course, but all the lay people. And it's interesting because I often in the monastery in Bodhinyana, I often sit up. The lay people come in every day and they offer food, and it's very, very beautiful to have that interaction with the lay people. It's really marvelous. And so I sit there on the boss seat when Ajahn Brahmali is away and Ajahn Appi is away. And so I ask lay people, how are you? And then they say, good. And I say, are you sure? What is this about? Is that? And I say, what is the right Buddhist answer to the question, how are you? What might be the right answer? So I really kind of putting them on the spot, and then start to wonder what's going on. Yeah. And these days, whenever I said, how are you to the lay people, they don't say anything. They know I'm up to some kind of trick, right? And they got quiet in the monastery. It's really funny when that happens. And so how are you is related to this idea of the purpose of life. Sometimes people say, I am good, yeah? But what does it mean that you are good? Well, usually it just means that you are being polite and saying nothing. That's usually what it means, right? But if you really think about that question, what does it mean, I am good? Well, it's hard to pin down, because compared to what exactly? Are you good compared to what you were yesterday? Compared to what you were last year? Compared to what you will be tomorrow? Compared to a past life? Compared to what? What does it mean? And one person's good can be another person's bad, and vice versa. It doesn't really say very much. So instead of thinking in terms of good and bad, we need to think about this whole idea of the purpose of life and what is meaningful in a different way. And the whole purpose of the Buddhist path is to go in a certain direction. And if you go in that direction, then you are fulfilling the Buddhist purpose. And that direction is a direction of less and less suffering and more happiness. Less and less defilements, more and more purity of mind. Less and less stupidity, more and more wisdom. That is the path. And so if you can see this happening inside of yourself, that you are leaving some of the suffering behind, you are becoming a more happy, generous, kind, caring, compassionate person, then you are on the right track. And so what we should do as Buddhists, we should ask ourselves at intervals, maybe once every 6 months or once a year or something like that, we should ask ourselves, well, is it working? Am I getting anywhere? Am I becoming more mindful? Am I becoming more kind-hearted? Am I getting less angry? Less greedy? All of these kind of things. And if all of these things are happening, the defilements are going down and the good qualities are going up, then you are on the right track. Then your life is meaningful. Then you know that you're doing something useful. Because if you keep on doing that, then the Buddha's promise is that eventually you will reach Nibbana itself, because that's where that path leads. So this is how you should measure your life. What is happening in my mind? Am I becoming a better person or not? And then you know you're on the right track. And the Buddha actually talks about this in the suttas. This is not just my idea, of course. It's straight out of the suttas, really. The Buddha says we should, how do you decide whether you are doing the right thing? Am I in the right relationship? Am I in the right job? Am I in the right religion? That's a bit more tricky, because this is actually from this religion. So, but anyway, am I in the right kalanamittas? Right? Are these kalanamittas? Are they right or are they wrong? I wonder now. Let me look around a bit. Yeah, okay. I think they're all right. So everything should be answered with this simple question. If it is right, if you are improving in good qualities and declining in bad qualities, then it is right. You're living in the right place. Okay, whatever. What was that line in the Mangala Sutta? Living in the right, good place. Patirupa de savaso. That's exactly right. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So everything should be related to that. Yeah, I'm staying at Bodhinyana Monastery. Is that a good idea? I I have now come to Sydney. Was that smart? Was that wise, or was it not? So I had to ask myself, is it a good idea or not? Okay, I'll come to Sydney here. So everything is measured according to that. And the Buddha goes so far as to say that these robes I'm wearing, are these conducive to that? So, for example, if you are using robes out of pride or because you think, well, these are really fancy robes and you get attached to them or whatever, then it's a bad idea. Or the food you're eating, is that appropriate? Are you not eating not too little nor too much? Food that is appropriate for your health, that will assist the spiritual life rather than contradict it. All of these things matter as well. So everything can be measured according to that standard. And it's a very useful thing to make decisions in life. One of the questions you get all the time as a monastic is how to make decisions. Well, this is how the Buddha really says we should make decisions. Ask yourself, how is it going to affect your spiritual practice? That's the only thing that matters, the only thing that makes life meaningful at the end. All right. Okay, respected Ajahn. Ajahn Brahm once mentioned to look at light when you are dying. He said to just merge with the light and forget everything else. Could you please explain what happens at the time of death? So what happens when you die will depend a lot on what kind of person you have been in this life. Yeah. So be as good as you possibly can, do the right thing, and then that is the best way of preparing yourself for dying. This is far more important than what you do when you actually die. Usually when you're dying, it's too late. Yeah, there's a nice sutta with a couple of Brahmins that come to the Buddha and they say to the Buddha, "Oh, we are 120 years old." Yeah, in other words, we are really ancient and we are about to die. That's basically what they're saying. And we haven't done anything good. We have just done bad things our whole life. Please teach us so that it is for our good. And the Buddha says, well, if you've done all bad stuff, that's it. You have a problem. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. That's what he says to these poor Brahmins. Yeah, and then there's nothing more they can do. So don't fall into that trap that somehow when you die, you can kind of do some kind of magic to get reborn in a good place, even though you have done many bad things. Everything we do matters. Every action is important, and that is what will really support you when you die. So in the commentaries, they talk about different kinds of kamma that ripens when you die. And so they have your habitual kamma, and they have, I don't know these things so well because I don't read the commentaries very much, but habitual kamma is one of the important ones. And then there's what they call death proximate kamma, which is the kamma that, arises in your mind as you're about to die. Now that last kamma, death proximate kamma, I think is overrated and overstated. And the reason why it is overstated is because it depends on Abhidhamma understanding of dying process. And according to the Abhidhamma understanding of the dying process, there is the Chuti Chitta, which is the mind that happens the moment you die, and then there's the Patisandhi Vijnana, which is the reconnecting consciousness, the first consciousness in the next life. And according to Abhidhamma, you just go from one to the next one. Yeah, so in other words, the last mind moment is going to be very important because it decides where you get reborn, and that's where you get this idea of death proximate kamma arising. Yeah. But that is not really how the suttas work. When you see the suttas, they talk about an intermediate stage between the lives. It talks about kind of how you recollect your own actions at that point. Yeah, they talk about how you go to King Yama says, well, you did all of these things. And you say, oh, no, I didn't understand. Oh, help, but you did all these bad things. Oh, I didn't really, I didn't get it. But you are a grown-up person. You're supposed to understand. Oh, but I still didn't understand. Okay, we will have to go according to your actions. That's what Yama says. Yama doesn't send you to hell. He just tells you have to go according to your actions. Yeah, presumably, yeah. Bardo is a Tibetan word for that, for that thing, yeah. And so, so this is kind of the most important thing. So make sure you make heaps of good kamma and you really build up your mind in a very positive way before you die. Then you're going to have a good death. And then you can maybe merge with the light. You cannot merge with that light if you haven't done all the right things. So what does that mean? Well, it means, this is why I'm saying that dying and meditation are so similar, because the idea here is that it is similar thing to going into samadhi in meditation practice. So if you are able to do that in samadhi, it means you have a massive advantage when you die, because you know the path in already. And when you die, it's usually easier because you have to let go. In our ordinary life, we have to kind of find that somehow that ability to let go can be quite hard. But when you die, it kind of comes as part of the process, and so it happens. And so learn that in meditation. And if you don't learn it in meditation, then follow Ajahn Brahm's suggestion. Wait when you die, see what happens to the mind. If your mind is pure, the light may come up, and then just kind of focus on the light. And as you focus on the light, then you may go into that samadhi at the moment of death. And then you'll be happy, at the very least you'll be happy for a very long time afterwards, which is kind of handy. Don't look down upon, maybe for some eons, you might be really happy for some eons. And then the eons are over, and you come back to the same misery. Right? That's the problem. Maybe it could be even worse, exactly. So that's why it is so unsatisfactory, because ultimately you come back again. Yeah.
Can you tell me the name of the sutta you remember? About the Brahma who's old?
The Brahma who is...
The Brahma who's 120 years old.
The Brahmins. I can't remember the number of the sutta. It's just the kind of one of those memories that I have. I should look it up. I'll see if I can look it up for you. It's kind of fun. Yeah. But it's, exactly, So, please remind me and I will look it up for you. Let's see if I can find it. I probably have remembered wrong, then I have to kind of have my tail between my legs and kind of sneak out. Because this happens sometimes. Your memory is completely off and you kind of said some stupid things. So this is the problem with talking a lot, is that you end up saying at least some stupid things as well. Anyway. Okay, maybe one more question. There are still a few questions. No, it's not. It's the last one. The rest are just blank. Wow, that's amazing. That's exactly the last question. Okay, that's cool. Okay, dear Ajahn, hope you are feeling better from your cold. Didn't really have much of a cold, so it's okay. So no worries. Lots of metta prayers and warm wishes your way. Thank you so much. It's very, very kind of you. I appreciate that. If an asuttavā puthujjana doesn't have exposure to the Dhamma, how can he or she break the shackles of conditioning? Warm regards. That is a good question. How can you break it? And the answer is you can't. This is why the arising of the Buddha in the world is such an incredibly important event, because that is what opens up the possibility for breaking those shackles. When there is no Buddha, you can't break them. And so you can get reborn in the Brahma Loka, or you can have a lot of happiness for a long, long period of time, but eventually you have to come back again to this existence. And this is kind of scary, right? When you see that, it's kind of really, wow. So why is it that some people, come across, get exposure to the Dhamma while others don't get it? Well, it's because of all kinds of conditioning. Sometimes your mind has already been developed in a direction that is so far from the Dhamma that you can't really get exposure to it in this life, because you're only interested in, Christianity or atheism or whatever, and you can't really deal with the Dhamma. It just seems too implausible. Rebirth, must be joking. Rebirth is obviously an ancient superstition, except maybe it is not. And this is kind of the problem. And it is very entrapping, the world. Very entrapping. It traps you. It binds you down. You can't see. You are deluded. And because you are deluded and blind, it's very hard to find your way out. Delusion supports itself. Delusion begets more delusion. That is the problem with all of this. And so you have to be, and many of us have probably been there before. We've probably had the Dhamma there in the past, and then we lost it again, and then we come back to it again. It's like this kind of cycle of things. And when you understand this, you feel the sense of urgency. You understand that this opportunity is precious, because you don't know when you will have that opportunity again. It's very uncertain. We have a man in Perth who was born in Pakistan. And he was born in Pakistan, and then he found out that he was a Buddhist. How did he find out? He just listened to some things online. He thought, wow, I'm a Buddhist, I'm not a Muslim. he had kind of grown up as a Muslim, obviously, because that's pretty much everyone in Pakistan. And so he told his daughter, actually, small little daughter, very young, she found out, maybe told her, I can't remember exactly how it worked, that, I think I'm a Buddhist. I listen to these talks. And he would travel to Malaysia, go on Ajahn Brahmali retreats and all these kind of things. And then one day in their house, when they have lots of visitors, they're all Muslims, this daughter says to these Muslims, but my dad is a Buddhist. And everyone turns, what is wrong with his dad? And her dad knew at that point he would just have to leave the country, because that is so dangerous in Pakistan. If you're an apostate, right? An apostate basically means that this is punishable by death sometimes in places like Pakistan. And if the law doesn't do it, people will take justice in their own hands, and they will punish you, and they will stone you, or whatever is the required punishment. And so once his daughter had said that, he knew there was a fatwa written out against him, right? Fatwa against you, which basically means that people kind of can come and get you or whatever. And so he had to kind of pack his belongings in a car, drive off to a nearby city, get on the plane, and then he fled to Sri Lanka. And then eventually from Sri Lanka, he made his way to Perth. And then when he came to Perth, he came to us and he said, I had to flee. And here is a fatwa, by the way, just in case you doubt my story. And then we went to the Australian authorities and we asked for asylum for him, right? And he got asylum because obviously this was a real thing. And so this is kind of the danger of being born in a place where it actually is very, very difficult to even hear the Dhamma, because it is prohibited for you to hear that Dhamma. And so it can be very, very tricky indeed. So the short answer is take the opportunity when you have it. Okay, so that is it for this evening. Let us finish. I always think it's nice to finish the day with just doing the Arahang Samma Sambuddho. Do you do that? Yeah? So let's do that together.